Willie Brown, thanks for coming in this morning. How you doing, man?
Thanks for having me, brother.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, my friend.
How's your 2018 been? How's it been treating you?
Oh, my God. 2018, put it this way. My tax guy is going to catch pure D hell.
Yeah? You need some quick write-offs before the end of the year?
Oh, my God. I'm trying. I got a couple trips and been buying gear. I did a massive B&H emergency,
That's how this place started. I come home and there'd be B&H boxes on my porch.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so it's been a great. I'm blessed. I can't complain. I've been eating.
So this year has been real steady. Would you say this has been the busiest year so far? Because it seems like we've been on a 10-year run of just positive growth in our industry.
I was just going to say, I can't say this year. It's been consistent the past probably 5 years. The same style of just like lining up back-to-back shows. They're falling right on top of one another, flying from one show to another show. I mean, it's been a crazy year, But last year was crazy too, So I don't know. It's just been it's great.
So just real quick before we get into what you're doing,
yeah.
So how do you kind of get your start in this industry? Was it like 99.9% of people where it was completely by accident? Like when did you first hear the word like live event production or AV?
So when you say accident, check this out. So I went into the Marine Corps. I wanted to be a graphic artist. I said, hey, I want to be a graphic artist. So I went to the Air Force recruiter and said, hey, I know you guys have graphic arts. He said, I'm pretty sure we do. We're in the Air Force. Looked and looked, didn't have my job. A couple weeks later, called me and said, the Marines has your job, graphic artist. I was like, excellent. I go, I join, I do my boot camp and stuff. Well, in boot camp, drill instructor says, dude, your job is weird. I was like, what? He said, your job it says combat photographer AV. He's like, what is that? I was like, that's not what I chose.
So completely by accident.
Completely by accident. Next thing you know, I'm a combat photographer during war times. But during peace times, I work in a classroom. I'm an audiovisual technician that sets up presentations for generals and stuff. And so I'm doing slide projectors, setting up screens, and that's when slide projectors, 35 millimeter for all you young guys, if you know what that is, was actually the screens, it was called multi-image.
Right.
Started doing those, and I started loving it. I was like, oh, that's not a bad gig. I'm doing TVs and VCRs.
And are you surprised that more people from the military aren't in this industry? Because I've thought about that a lot. And when you're in the military, you have to show up on time, you have to be organized, you're working under stressful conditions, and you're away from your family a lot. And those to me are the ingredients for being in live production. And I remember years ago doing a show with you, and I was like, Willie, dude, you always look so calm. And you're like, man, I've been shot at. Like this is not that stressful for me. So it kind of seems like with all those ingredients and being in a high pressure zone, producer isn't going to shoot at you. They might say, hey man, what's going on with this? Let's get this working. But compared to that level of stress, it seems like this would be an easy transition for most people in the military. It's also technical. So, why don't we see more veterans coming into this industry?
The problem with this job is it's like Area 51, bro. It's like when I was getting ready to transition to becoming a civilian, I didn't even know about this job in the civilian world. Luckily, in the military, in the Marine Corps, they have a thing called doors. It says your job in the military is equivalent to this job in the civilian world. And it picked jobs for me. It was like, well, if you go into Orlando, you should go to LMG. I was like, what is LMG? It says it does AV like you do. So first thing I did, I came home and I went to LMG.
So it's going to match you up with the civilian equivalent.
It matches you up with the civilian equivalent. But you have to be in that job in the military. And that's why a lot of military personnel won't, because doors does not tell them that there's a such thing as this industry.
Okay, so if you're working on Humvees,
it's going to say you should go over here to Heitzelman's trucks. You should go over here and work here.
Okay, so it's not pointing them it's pointing them in the direction of the skill and trade they've already learned.
That's right. It only opens the door to your job equivalent. In the Marine Corps and the military, I had an odd job. We all knew each other. The whole Fleet Marine Corps, all of the AV technicians, combat photographers, we knew each other because our field was only like 500. One guy got out of the Marine Corps, everybody got promoted. Our field was so small. So I know why military don't, because you don't hear about it. You don't hear about it unless we go and get guys to say, man, by the way, bro, this gig it's outstanding. You show up on time and they just put you to work.
Right. It pays well. It's never the same day, right?
It's
not
great.
boring.
And it's military style. I never know where I'm going to work next. And it's kind of random like it is in the military. It's, you never know what you're going to do, who you're going to work with. It's different personnel. It's like getting deployed to a different duty station.
So do you feel like your military training has made you more successful as a technician and a freelancer?
Oh my God, 100%. Are you kidding me? Because first of all, in the Marine Corps, if you're 15 minutes early, you're almost late. That's why if the gig is at 8 o'clock, I'm there at 7:15, hanging out, doing what I need to do.
Well, you're here an hour early today, so I walked in. I was like, all right, let's go.
Yeah,
let's do it.
This job is a gimme. But one thing I like about this job is I've never seen a mortar. I've never seen one round come, downrange, even though civilians are starting to do stuff like that. But it's a nice, easy gig for a military person in general to come and kind of transition into. It's still the same style for us. It's still on time. It's still a certain order that
Well, like I fly a lot, and I always say to myself, I always tell people, I always want to have an American pilot.
Yeah.
And it's not, and the reason why that is because most pilots that fly for American Airlines are military trained.
That's right.
So it's a highly automated job.
That's right.
There's not a lot that can go wrong, thank God. But when there is, you have to have that stress management, that training that you can actually solve problems. And that's one thing with people that want to be trained and get into our industry.
Yeah.
The one thing that you can never teach them in a classroom is what it's like to be on show site 30 minutes before doors and your switcher just locked up, or your projector just went down, or your LED wall's flickering, and everybody's looking at you. And sometimes when the walls close in, it could be a simple thing like just swapping out a cable or doing a reboot. But if you're not used to working under those stressful conditions, you get this thing called channel lock, where you kind of let walls close in, and you can't fix a simple problem. So that's where I see military training becoming important, because those are the only way you can learn that is through time and experience. And that's something that you can never teach in a classroom. Is okay, this E2 that you're sitting in front of, it's easy because everything's working. But what happens when it turns against you and something happens? Or a client throws a last-minute change, and you have to deal with that. That's where that stress management comes into play.
See, I think, too, a lot of classroom environments, they call it boot camp. Well, if you're going to call it boot camp, you should run your classroom almost like a boot camp. Teach them the first few days, and then that third day, have a real producer come in and do a real show. Have them do a real show in the classroom and stress them out the way you would get stressed in a real world show environment. Have a real producer come in, take preset one, go now, preset one, and it really show them what a real show is.
Or
like.
do a hard reset on the E2 30 minutes before show and
That's
say, hey,
right.
you got to reprogram
this
thing right now.
That's right. Give them a real world. If it's going to be a class, give them a boot camp by the end of the class. Say, hey, guys, we're going to set up a real show. Stress them out, give them time frame. Hey, guys, this show needs to be up in 30 minutes. Then 10 minutes before that, kill the power on them. Do something, really make it a real.
Because it's going to happen in the real world.
You have to. And, at least they walk away knowing that, hey, it's not just sitting behind this desk clicking on, a few screens.
It's going to happen all the time. I remember I did an award show in Miami years ago, and it was kind of like a party atmosphere backstage, and someone sat on the power distro and shut everything off. So I had to run on stage. I was running the E2 the Encore back then, a big LC controller, and there was no projectionist. So I had to go out there on stage, like it was a television show, and literally turn the FLMs back on. But you just have to realize, okay, this is what, I'm the guy that has to do this. And if I have to jump on stage and turn these things on, that's what I have to do. But like you said, it's hard to teach that.
It's hard to teach that. Like my recent 1 hour before the concert. This is a concert. Kids coming in, everything. Concert going. I'm in the back, and I look at my E2, and I'm like, every time she hits a preset, it's taking the presets live on screen. So I was like, oh, she has the button clicked to make it go live. No, it's not that. I'm like, modify layers on screen. No, I'm looking. I was like, oh my God, it's literally taking everything live to screen. So of course, first thing I do, I call Yoda. I call Bob.
Right, Bob Murdoch.
Bob Murdoch. I say, hey,
Yoda.
Bob,
Okay,
hey, Yoda, look, brother, this is what happened. He's like, oh, yeah, we did find that bug in that revision. You have to update. That's the only way to get it to happen. I'm like, what? 45 minutes before doors? Okay, bump it. I go to the client. I say, hey, I know why it's doing that. The reason why is because this. And you know what? It's no problem. I'll take care of that for you. I'm dying inside. But I'm like, I have to keep her calm. So I'm like, okay. She said, oh, can you make it happen? I said, no problem. I do this all the time. I'm updating the E2. 30 minutes now after that whole explanation before doors.
Don't let them see you sweat.
Oh, not at all. I was sitting back, I'm inside, I'm dying, brother. But I was like, okay, 15%, 20%, and she's like, oh, he's so calm. I was over there, drinking my drink and brother, inside dying. But on the same note, I'm like, nobody's shooting at me.
Right.
There's no mortars.
Well, and you're confident that you can get the machine up and running so that you can actually do the show.
Because I've trained on it. Yeah, I've trained on that machine for so long to where I'm like, I know it inside and out. So I was like, you know what, this is something that I do all the time. I wasn't that worried.
Now you're a video engineer now by trade. So when you got out of the military, you got your first job. What was your first position in this industry?
So my first job, and I want to thank Randy Noble at Image Technical Services. I went to LMG, interviewed for a gig. They said, come back, we'll bring you back in a week. But on my way back, Doris told me, try this other company too. That was my second one, was Image. I went, talked to Randy Noble. This was the owner. He was leaving for the day, and I said, hey, man, I'm in the Marine Corps now. I'm looking for a gig. He said, well, cool. Can you come in and sit down and do a test and talk to Tim Durr? I said, no problem. Came in, did Tim Durr's test. Tim Durr talked to Randy. Randy said, hey, man, what size shirts do you wear? I was like, large? He's like, here you go. I told him, hey, I got to go back for 2 weeks, but I'll be back. He gave me my shirts.
So you were hired that day?
I was hired that day.
So then you were thrown in, you probably at that company, you're thrown in the mix. You're pulling shows, prepping shows, going out on the road, driving the truck, doing everything, right?
I was a driver tech. I immediately came, and they had box trucks. We had a 28-foot box truck. And they were like, you got to get a CDL. And Randy's like, he's military. He can drive anything. I still had a military ID, too. So Randy's like, I need you to take that truck, CDL box truck, and I need you to go to Castleberry, drop all this gear off, and pick this gear up. They were calling it drop-off, hotel drop-off. So immediately, my first day at work, I'm driving a 28-foot box truck in downtown Orlando, dropping off gear. And then when I got back, I worked in a warehouse, QC. We would receive the new gear, label it, and it was a good gig, man. It was warehouse work, but it was like really good because it allowed me to learn everything I put my hands on.
And then eventually did they kind of say, hey, Willie, can you go out and do this show? And then you're kind of moving more into the ballroom setting?
Strangely enough, I got on show by accident. One time I was dropping off gear, some camera gear, and one of the camera guys was like, hey, man, I just don't want to do handheld. This is a concert. I can't hold the camera that whole time. And I was like, well, what type of camera is it? He showed me that. And I was like, man, I know those cameras, and I'm used to, in Marine Corps, we don't do tripods. It's all handheld, running from shots. So I was like, wow, brother, do you mind if I try that? And, man, put the handheld on, did the whole concert, and Tim Durr praised me and said, hey, man, you were like literally like you had a tripod. And I was like, bro, can I do this again? He was like, sure can. And I got on show as a camera guy. I started off doing a handheld camera for shows.
And then did you slowly kind of work into image processing? Because I kind of feel like at some point when you're in video, I think the best thing you can do is run the camera, do the projection, drive the truck, and then from there you kind of hone your skills. And you've kind of gravitated more towards image processing. I think Image was one of the first companies to buy the original Encore. So when that came in, did they kind of say, Willie, this is going to be your machine? You learn how to drive it?
Actually, before that, we bought an Extron 408 switcher that came in. And I remember sitting in the back with the guys, and I was like, man, I'm used to this type of switch, too, because in the Marine Corps, everything was kind of it was an install, so everything was just all buttons. But I was like, you know what? This looks like right down my alley. Started switching on that one. It kind of just took to it. I was like, man, I'm enjoying being the guy that's making everything live on the screen. Fast forward to when the Encore came out, the Encore came out. Randy was like, hey, I want to keep this switching thing going. Our clients love it. We love the seamless, the way it's going. We had a big client, which was Lockheed Martin at that time, and they loved the way we could just bring everything into one box and not have all these, failure points.
Right.
And just got a good relationship with Barco, and Chris Prozio was my teacher. I would go over there and hang with those guys. Randy would literally say, hey, just go. Anything new they have, learn it. And we would just beta test everything they had. I mean, from the screen shapers to, to the Folsoms and to the actual the scalers. And I just kind of gravitated towards the image processing side of it, and the switch. I didn't get into calling cameras till late.
Okay.
I just enjoyed the actual engineering.
Managing the signal.
That's right, the signal flow. Calling cameras was never really something I wanted to do because I was like,
it's a different art form.
It
but
is,
the good thing is, like what I always tell people, especially if we'll jump ahead just for a second, but people that want to learn the E2, for example, because it's gotten a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Now it's just we've gone from racks of gear to this one piece of gear. And what I tell people is like, look, if you want to learn the E2, back when I was doing it, like I wasn't the Encore op, I was the V1. And to me, if you're going to be the V1, if you're going to be in that position, not only do you have to know how to use that piece of gear, but you also need to know how to jump in and do handheld camera. You need to know how to jump on a Playback Pro. You need to know how to call cameras. It doesn't mean that you're going to do it as good as people that do that every day, but to be a V1, you have to at least be a B level in projection and a B level in camera, because in case you need to fix it, troubleshoot it, or jump in there and run it, because someone might not show up, and then you're the guy that's got to run. You're the guy that's got to call cameras. So one way or another, eventually you're going to need to do it. Luckily, in the corporate setting, most of the time it's camera 1, camera 2. It's not like you're jumping into 6, 7 cameras. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I kind of feel like if you're in that top image processing position, you kind of need to know all the respective disciplines. It's important.
I tell people all the time, if you're a V1 or you're the EIC, you're a TD also. But I tell people all the time, how can you be a TD if you're not a T? If you're not a tech to start with, how can you direct techs, or how can you even come in and troubleshoot tech? You have to be everything that's connected to your switch. You have to at least have a basic knowledge of.
Well, you have to, when you show up, you have to know, hey guys, you have to sit down with the crew. This is how we're going to wire things.
That's right.
This is what we need to accomplish today.
That's right.
And the worst thing you can do is just show up and say, well, I'm the image processing guy. Yeah. It's like, no, you're in charge.
No, you
it's
are
important.
the man. No,
you're the V1.
Guys, I'll sit here and you bring everything to me. No, because for one thing, if you don't know how to troubleshoot the gear that you're bringing into the E2, the first thing you're going to do is say, is something wrong with the E2? Well, that piece of gear may be set on the wrong setting or put in the wrong resolution.
Well, it's easy to blame the gear, right? Because the gear can't defend itself.
Right.
It can't say, hey, this isn't me, man. This is this guy. He's not trained.
No, a lot of kids, they try to jump ahead. And I tell a lot of kids, man, you want to start on the ground floor. Because the cool thing about me starting on the ground floor and starting as a warehouse technician, I can walk in any warehouse right now and any piece of gear pulled off the shelf, and I know something about it. It may be newer or updated, but I know basic knowledge of it. I know the cables, the signal flow, what's going on with it. And that allows me as an engineer to truly say, hey, no, the problem is those cameras are known for having this type of resolution when they first boot up. What you have to do is hold this button down, press the up arrow, and it'll actually drop down to 1080i. You know those little things that you don't learn when you just take a class on the E2 and immediately just jump into the position. That's why a lot of kids now, they fail when they're on show because, you know the box, but if you don't know what's coming into the box.
Well, that's ultimately, and as a equipment rental company, I don't mind saying this, but, the gear or the people are way more important than the equipment.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. We like to think that the gear is really important, but it's really the people that are running it. Obviously, you want to have good gear, but like you said, if you have someone that doesn't know how to do that switch in that menu or go into the menu and do the drop down and figure out, hey, I'm going to switch this from one resolution to another. Yeah. Someone will figure that out, but it might take a few hours. And then now they've moved on to troubleshooting that when someone with the experience that you have can just be like, oh, here, 5 seconds, we'll fix it and we'll move on. And what I've noticed, in my career is there's when you do a show where the gear's good, the people are good, and of course the client's good too. It's the easiest job in the world.
Gravy train,
but unfortunately, sometimes you don't get all three of those, right? And you're always kind of fighting that. So the more you can kind of bring to the table, the easier you can make it on site, the better. Because there is a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of changes, and it is a complicated profession because ultimately you're building something, it's up for a few days, it's up and running, everything's troubleshot, and then it's taken apart and put on the truck and goes to the next city.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned gear. When you become an engineer and you pretty much know, the signal flow and everything that's going on, it becomes one of those deals where now you get to the show and you're like, whose gear is it?
Right.
I find myself now, I'm more of a gear snob now. I'm like, whose gear? Oh, it's Evolve's gear. Oh, I'm good to go. I know that my work box will have this, have that. You become to where once you know and you learn the gear, you just want to know where it came from and who
Well, ultimately, what you want to have, you want your say when you're an engineer is you want to at least tell the staging company, whoever's providing the equipment. To me, it's due diligence. Everybody has to say, look, send me a list of the gear.
Yeah.
Because you're not hiring me to just run this piece of equipment. You're hiring me to say, look, we're short image pros.
Mm-hmm.
The cable count seems light.
Yeah.
We got to get this pulled together because when you do this over and over again, you can kind of visualize the show. Okay, it's in this ballroom. I know the cable lengths are this long.
That's right.
I know the power is going to go really far to the projectors. Let me make sure that sometimes you guys know the show better than the staging company because you, especially in Orlando, you've been in those ballrooms so many times. You know what's good and what's bad and how to get around it.
Yeah, you do. And once again, it goes back to experience. Coming up as a young tech, I've worked the Peabody Ballroom, how many times? 1 million times in my life. So I know it says that the ballroom is 500 feet. But the bad part about it is there's a huge column that blocks everything. So you got to account for another 30 feet to go around this column. It's not showing you that on the CAD drawing.
You only get that with time and experience.
You only get that with experience, with trial and error. With, hey, guys, could you send another truck? Why? We're short.
Now, let me ask you about freelancing because I remember you called me up, I don't know, it was like 12 or 13 years ago, and I barely knew you. I only heard the name Willie Brown.
Yeah.
And I remember you called me and my phone rang, and I answered the phone. You're like, I was loading in a show here in Orlando, and you said, hey, I'm thinking about going freelance. What do you think? Yeah. And I think my advice at the time, we were, was kind of getting out of the recession era. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of work going on. And I think I said to you, now or never, like now's the best time to come and get into this field. And obviously you transitioned, you left your job and you've been freelance ever since. And I understand why that decision is difficult for a lot of people because there are pros to working full time and there are pros to working freelance.
Yeah.
So when you transition from one to the other, what pros and cons did you see? Did you instantly have work lined up? What was the transition like going from years of full-time work to now you probably spent more of your career freelancing than you have done full-time, right?
See, for me, it worked out because I did 10 years at one company. But during that 10-year time, a lot of guys that were in positions in companies were freelancing at that time. So I had guys coming in freelancing for me that eventually started companies like yourself or went to a company and became like the chief salesman or this guy or that guy.
Right.
So before I went freelance, I sort of tapped on my resources and sort of lined them up. I knew that first year, a year prior to me quitting that I was going to quit. Once again, being military, I was like, you never deploy without first checking the terrain, checking out the environment, seeing where you're going to land at. So I started tapping on my guys, saying, hey, what's the climate out there? I even called you, said, hey, man, I'm thinking about going. I know you've been, because remember, we would bring you in to freelance. So I said, hey, man, I know you've been out in the real world. What is it looking like? What's the climate now? So yeah, for me, it was a little easier because being full-time that long, I built up relationships with all these companies and all these guys. So I tapped my resources first. So when I jumped out, I had quite a bit of work, in guys like Mike Cogan that were already out there freelancing and had, was doing labor and had labor guys. So I tapped on my guys and kind of jumped out. But I had a few slow times too, don't get me wrong, because when the summer, as we call it, came, I was like, I'm a little slow.
But the summers are becoming increasingly
There's no such thing.
Busier, right?
There's no such thing.
That's one thing that when I was a tech, I thought about that a lot. I fell in the trap that a lot of freelancers fall into, which is it seems like, I have all the freedom in the world, I can work when I want, but then ultimately what happens is you have a couple weeks off and you get that call and someone puts money on the table and you have to say, okay, do I take this money off the table? Do I do this gig? Even though I've been on the road for a couple months, it's hard to have that discipline. And as someone with a family, I've got a family, you've got a family, is it difficult to balance that lifestyle where you do have to go on the road a lot, you do have to feed your family, but also because the industry has grown so much, and I think arguably that there aren't enough new people coming in that have the experience. Guys like you that are been in this for a while, I think are being leaned on more and more because you do have the experience. Do you feel the pressure of that? Because you could probably work every day if you wanted to, right? And you can't.
Well, I've gone past the feast or famine mentality now. Now I'm sort of to the point where I know that I have work. But it is one of those deals where, once again, that's when I tell these kids, you got to come to a certain point in your life where you say, pick one gig that you know is not going to stress you, is not going to beat you. I do screen switch. Basically I sit down all day on my backside. So I'm not stressing myself as far as, doing physical labor and stuff like that. So I can work every day. I do try to balance it out. Now I do where I call it 3 on, 3 off. I'll do 3 months and then I'll take a couple of weeks off to sort of take a break with my family and enjoy my family.
But I have noticed, I've noticed there's a kind of a crop of freelancers that are maybe like mid to late 30s, early 40s, and I've been impressed with the lifestyle that they've been leading, which is they balance it out. They don't eat the hotel food. They might call Uber Eats and get something healthy, and they go hit the gym at night. And sometimes you get sucked into going to the bars late with the group. There's always the two groups: one that goes to the bar, the other one that goes up the elevator. Well, now you got people that are going to the gym, and I feel like if you want to do this long term, and we were talking about this earlier, maybe you can touch on a little bit where in the projection field, projection is not going away, but it's changing. And ultimately, what a lot of projectionists have to ask themselves is, do I just diversify and only do projection, or when you're a freelancer, you do the same gigs every year. So when your client comes to you and says, hey, the show that you've been doing for 10 years that's projection is now LED, then you have to make a choice. Do I say no, or do I learn a new trade and kind of mix that in with my projection trade? The downside is LED is a lot more physical than projection. So you're having to, pull all these tiles and climb and troubleshoot. So there's kind of some changes there. Now what you're doing, it's not as much, but like on the projectionist side, there is kind of a sea change happening, and guys are kind of, I think I've seen some projectionists who are kind of getting retrained, because ultimately they're having to ask themselves, all right, do I say no, or do I kind of do both? There is you do have to adapt every once in a while in this industry. And this is like the one time that I really noticed there's a real big sea change. Normally, a lot of times in image processing, you might go from an Encore to an E2, or you might have to learn a Spider. Mm-hmm. But it's not like a client saying, well, this is totally going away, and now you have to completely retrain yourself and use this.
Well, I think with projection and stuff like that and LED, it's coming to the point to where you as doing a projection, you have to say, do I want to transition to something else like calling cameras, or do I want to learn a new skill? In this business, if you stop learning, you stop working. So if I was a projectionist, I would most definitely take a few LED classes. But remember, it is physical, but a lot of times when you're doing LED, you do have hands.
Well, that's the key, is you want to become the LED engineer.
That's right. You want to be the guy that says, okay, guys, here's my diagram, here's my drawing. This is how I need my cables ran. Supervise them. But remember, there's always young guys out there that are willing to do labor. In this business, if you don't learn how to manage labor, once again, you won't last long in this business. You have to be a manager to be a freelancer also.
Because you're going to wear yourself out.
You're gonna beat yourself down. You're not going to last. So yes, if I was a projectionist, it would be natural for me to transition over to being a LED technician. I started off doing multi-image with 35 millimeter projectors. Then projectors came in, triple gun projectors. I learned them. Then other projectors, DLPs came out. I learned those. I stayed within my field, and I always learned in my field because I wanted to be a projectionist. And it went from 35 to what it is now. If I was still doing that, of course I'd be in the first LED class I would have been in, because you have to say, okay, if I'm going to stay in this business, I have to keep learning.
Well, that's the ultimate thing, is either you learn or you die.
You learn or you die.
Or if you decide to take a couple years off, let's say, and come back to it, it's not that everything that you've learned is gone. But man, especially on the video side, it moves so quickly that it can leave you in the dust really fast. I think I'd be lost on the playground, to be honest, if I went back out there.
3 years, you'll go from engineer, EIC, to stagehand.
You're going to start back over.
Oh yeah, you're reset. You just hit the reset button in AV. You have to stay in this game. But I balance my life out now a little better. I used to be greedy. I started off, I'd work every day, but I had the military mentality, burn until December, and then, take a break then, not realizing that you have to have a balance when you have a family, because your family is without you. Once again, my advantage is my wife now was my girlfriend when I was in the Marine Corps. So she's used to me going away for 6 months with not even being able to call. So for me to be gone for 3 weeks now, for her, is a joke. She's like, 3 weeks? Oh, man,
So come from the military and have a military wife, and that's the recipe for success.
No, not just that. I think taking a little break from your family every now and then makes for a stronger relationship. They miss you. If they see you every day, all day, then think about it. You just become like a television set. Oh, it's always going to be here. I can turn it on, turn it off when I want to.
Right.
And when you're gone, it kind of gives them a little bit of time to sort of miss you, and it makes stuff brand new when you come home.
So what in the minute we have left, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get in this industry?
Brand new technician.
Just starting out.
If I was just starting out, first thing you want to do, start on the ground, brother. If you can, work at a company for at least a couple years. Work in the warehouse. Start in the warehouse. Start loading trucks, packing gear, QCing gear. Everything that you need to learn is in that classroom called warehouse. That's where you learn your time management. That's where you learn how to QC gear. QCing the gear is just as important as running the gear. But you learn the ins and outs of the business. You learn so much in that warehouse. The best classroom in AV is a warehouse at a company. Go full time, do 2 years or so, and then see if you want to branch out in the real world.
Well, and the key, too, when you're working in the warehouse is don't just see these things as just road cases.
No.
When it's slow, open up a projector,
Training
crack
ground.
a manual, because what happens is people notice that. And they
training
say, because that's what you're looking for is that passion.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I could take someone that isn't technical and make them a good technician, but what I'm looking for ultimately is work ethic. Is a 9-to-5 job important to you?
Hunger. Hunger.
Do you mind working on the weekends?
That's right. You show me you're hungry, I'll feed you, bro. I will make sure you eat. But I'm telling you, the best training ground in the world is our warehouse. It's better than any classroom in the world.
Well, that's where I started, and that's where you started, and that's where a lot of people get their start. And I think it's important because that's where the fundamentals of the show begin, and then from there you can start building on it from there.
That's your boot camp.
Well, and then like you said, when I started in this industry, I was working in the warehouse. And I got, just on a whim, hey, can you help us out on show site?
Yeah.
And then as soon as I was out there, I was hooked.
Boom.
And that's all it takes. You put the time in, you have the right attitude, and then you get sucked into it, and then that's your livelihood.
Yeah, and here we are now.
Well, Willie, thanks for coming in.
Yeah,
really
brother.
appreciate your time. It was good chatting with you.
Good time, my friend.
All right.
Good time.
Thanks very much, and have a good holiday.
You too.